Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War, Warhammer 2, Kholek Magic gameplay. This time around we are playing as the Forces of Chaos against the Greenskins on the map the Cliff of Beasts. And so I did want to try out something a little different this time with Chaos. Obviously it gets a little boring, you keep doing the same thing over and over. And so no magic this time around, and instead we are going to be relying on some Chaos trolls. No great weapons, not really much, no magic. Simply relying on a bit of a mishmash of skirmish cav, infantry, and trolls. So we'll definitely see how things work out. For my Lord, bring Kholek, kind of my usual pick. I didn't bring Star Crusher. Didn't think it was really necessary against the Greenskins. It's kind of overkill and points I'd rather spell it elsewhere. I did bring Lord of the Storm, of course. It's a nice little support bombardment, and of course standard die just to provide those buffs. And of course Kholek's are pretty good against the Greenskins in general. He does have 25% missile resistance on top of 100 armor, so he's very quick at 78, so he's very hard for them to shut down. He can kind of trash anything they put on the field, and he does cause fear and terror, which is obviously a big problem for the poor Greenskins. So outside of that, for my front line, I do have a whole bunch of Chaos Warriors, 4 units of them. These guys are not going to trade well with, say, Black Orcs, but they are pretty cheap. They've got silver shields, they've got 100 armor, and they can basically trounce any other unit the Orcs might put on the field. So if I need to deal with Savage Orc, big guns, or normal Orcs or Gobos, anything like that, these guys will come out on top, and they do provide that sort of saturation to protect the Chaos Trolls with armor. They're also backed by aspiring champions because oftentimes I'll be maneuvering Kholek around. I won't really have him near my front line to provide support, and so I think it's always good to have a unit of aspiring champions in the front line. They do provide some magic damage, some extra staying power with their high melee defense and armor, and of course the main thing is they do provide encourage buffs for these trolls and for the Chaos Warriors. 3 units of Chaos Trolls with armor are really providing my main anti-armor staying power here. If my opponent brings Black Orcs, this is my hard counter to them. With their armor, they should be pretty tanky against missiles. They're actually surprisingly mobile at 54 speed. They've got pretty decent melee stats. 34, 32 is nothing to sneeze at. And my hope is definitely to kind of use these guys to trounce any heavy armor my opponent might bring. And yeah, these guys are kind of my anti-armor answer here. For my skirmish forces, I actually brought 2 Marauder Horsemasters and Hounds on one end, and then 2 Marauders with her Horsemen as well as a Hound on the other end. And the main reason for that is to shut down my opponent's backline. These guys can roll over, say, Goblin firing lines. They can pick away at units like Nasty Skulkers. They can get rear charges. They can chip away at most Orc units. And honestly, even if push comes to shove, they can try to work on Black Orcs somewhat effectively. So you can see I do get a little bit of poke here on these Nasty Skulkers, knock off a few models. My opponent's build, though, definitely a bit of an interesting mix as well. He did bring Trolls himself, trying to look for his Lord. He did bring Skarsnik, but not a Gobbo dedicated build, which was definitely a little surprising. He does have Wa, he does have Skarsnik's Prodder, which is a cool little magic missile spell that can do quite a bit of damage to mobs if you get a good cast of it. Skarsnik himself is a passable melee combatant, not amazing, not a decent melee defense, decent melee attack. He does have AP and anti-large, which is definitely very good. Okay charge bonus, and the main thing is he's pretty, he's fairly survivable. He does have 4,700 HP, and he's cheap to boot. He is backed up by a Night Goblin Shaman with Sneaky Stabbing and the Wand of Jet, as well as an Orc Shaman with the Wa. I do believe it's the here we go. So basically a Wa knockoff and Power of the Wa to improve power recharge rate. Personally, I do think better spell variety here would have been a good idea. Perhaps even cutting one of the mages to get more spells on the other, but nonetheless, definitely good selection of spells for raw buffs. For his front line, my opponent has a mix of Savage Orc Big Guns, Nasty Skulkers, Goblins, the Warlord's Boys, the Crimson Killers, so really kind of a mishmash of all sorts of units. Crimson Killers are going to definitely do a number on some of my troops, especially the Chaos Warriors, and because I didn't bring Fate of Bunon or anything like that, then I'm going to have a hard time punishing them. My opponent also does have a unit of Trolls here, which can, of course, apply some nasty pressure to my armored infantry, and they can provide some extra mass to kind of slow down some of my bigger troops. And, of course, this Broken Tusk mob here does have 90 armor, and they can definitely kind of threaten Kholek. Obviously, they don't cause fear and terror. They're not immune to psychology or anything like that, but they can definitely kind of threaten Kholek. They can apply some pressure to him and be a major nuisance. Now you can see the Goblin firing line is teeing off on my troops. I'm not entirely sure if they're focusing on Kholek here or the Chaos Trolls. Probably Kholek, though Kholek doesn't really care. He does have a lot of armor, as we mentioned before, so even with the Rusty Arrows in here, he's going to be very tanky. you can see I am starting to chip away at the broken dust mobs, trying to whittle them down with these javelins. It's important to keep in mind that these guys do have 8 armor-piercing damage, so even with decent armored troops, these guys will do some major damage. You can see they're already chipping away. The front line does immediately start breaking down. As you can see, my opponent doesn't have his Black Orcs in position, and I kind of exploited that fact to trash this blob of infantry. You can see the Savage Orc Big Guns, the Nasty Skulkers, all those units really don't stand a chance. And I do push Kholek in there to start laying the smackdown on Skarsnik while casting a Lord of the Storm on top of these Black Orc Crimson Killers. Now you can see the Chaos Trolls here are being debuffed. They are definitely taking a bit of a beating. You can see my opponent is casting some loons here, probably doing a good amount of friendly fire actually, but things are definitely looking okay. Over here the Broken Dust Mob do dive in against the Warhounds, but the Warhounds kind of a small unit, so they're actually resistant against their anti-large bonus. These Chaos Warriors are anchoring things, and you can see the Hounds just kind of pressuring these rusty arrows while the Goblin Horsemen, or while the Marauder Horsemasters are applying constant missile pressure to these Broken Tusks, and the Trolls whittling them down with those javelins, doing a very good job for me. And once these troops break, I'm going to be in a very good spot to kind of mop them up with my superior mobility. So you can see the Trolls here just being peppered down and broken. You can see the Broken Tusk Mob finally breaking despite still being on 36 models. They actually had decent leadership to begin with, so definitely a good little win there. Things are definitely looking pretty good. Over here Skarsnik has cast Here We Go, or actually, well, the Orc War Boss has cast Here We Go, trying to kind of whittle down my troops. You can see, unfortunately, I'm going to get pincered here by these Savage Orc Big Guns who are very mobile, and that's going to allow my opponent to really start wrapping up my flank here. The Chaos Trolls, despite doing quite a bit of damage, are going to get pincered, and that's going to start sort of a collapse of my whole line, as from this end with the Chaos Warriors straight down through to Kholek, my opponent's taking me apart. Fortunately for me though, this flank over here has gone in my favor. You can see I'm going to dive in on these Goblin Archers and kind of run them down with the Chaos Marauders. As I'm not entirely sure what my opponent was thinking there, but I'm simply going to run them over and then maneuver the Horsemasters around the flank to get some chip damage in on the Black Orcs and the Crimson Killers. Over here you can see the Hounds are trying to kind of run down these Trolls. I've gotten rid of these Nasty Skulkers and the Boilers boys, but with my opponent's Goblins and the Trolls rallying, I do decide to pull the Hounds away while chasing the Broken Tusk Mob off with the Hounds. And this is definitely a very solid win. The Broken Tusk Mob is a pretty expensive unit, and the Hounds are not. They're dirt cheap. Over here Kholek is chasing after Skarsnik, taking the poor little Gobbo to be pound down. You can see he's down to less than 1800 HP, so a little over a third of his starting HP. You can see these Goblin Archers getting run down. The Night Goblin Shaman is getting beaten to pulp by these Chaos Warriors, and my Marauder Horsemen are still kind of teeing off. These Aspiring Champions are very, very badly beaten up, but they are kind of going to hold their ground here with a little inspiration from Kholek. You can see a Lord of the Storm going down, beating up on these Savage Big Guns and the Black Orcs, and that chip damage from the Marauder Horsemasters is going to start adding up. Black Orcs are tanky, but once again, that 8 AP damage stacked on top of a decent amount of missiles, these guys still have an okay amount of ammo, is going to add up. Over here, the Night Goblin Shaman has been broken. You can see these Goblin Archers are kind of falling apart. And though my opponent is pulling troops back into the fray, I myself do have some Chaos Warriors here. I have some rallying troops. And now, with these troops routing off, I'm simply going to be able to sort of pull back, pull away from my opponent's army, and sort of retreat. You can see I'm actually pulling these Chaos Warriors away from my opponent's troops. I do unfortunately charge these Trolls, and this was a bit of a mistake on my part. Definitely shouldn't have done this. Completely unnecessary, and I should pull them away. But as you can see, I'm now going after the isolated troops, sending Marauder Horsemasters and their decent melee stats to chip away at these Nasty Skulkers, poke away at these rusty arrows, and eliminate my opponent's peripheral troops. Over here you can see Skarsnik is routed, and I'm going to start pulling troops away. I'm going to pull Kholek out, trying to chase Skarsnik down, because if I can kill him, he is going to be, his whole army is going to take a massive leadership penalty. You can see my army itself is not in a good spot either. These Chaos Trolls are kind of wavering, though they will potentially rally. These Chaos Warriors are rallying. What I'm simply trying to do at this point is let my army rally, let it regroup on the periphery, wipe out his fleeing troops, and then regroup for a final attack. But my opponent, seeing that Skarsnik's about to get gooned, and with the power bar heavily in my favor, does decide to bow out. So, definitely a matchup where I think the superior mobility, the superior kind of maneuverability of the Marauder Horsemasters and the Hounds really played a key factor in the win. The Hounds were able to pressure off and chase off fleeing units, though not always successfully. For example, some of those Trolls rallied at a most inopportune time and ended up trashing my Hounds. The Chaos Trolls with armor did prove somewhat effective. I'm not entirely sure that it was a worthwhile investment. They are somewhat expensive. I could have obviously had great weapons for their cost, but they definitely laid the smackdown on those Black Orcs while they were in there. The biggest problem was that, of course, my opponent had a lot of anti-large. He was able to wrap around me because I had a much shorter infantry line and really exploit that to his advantage. Otherwise, I do think from my perspective, definitely you can get away without magic as Chaos. It's definitely doable. One of the things I potentially could have done better is brought some Marauders with throwing axes. That could have allowed me to bust through that heavy armor much more efficiently. I do think you want to bring some skirmish capability. If you're playing as the Greenskins, despite the fact that orcs, skirmishers often can't do too much damage to you, they often can't do the greatest damage to, say, Chaos Warriors or heavier troops. They can still do some chip damage. Morgul's Mangy Marauders are a major nuisance and can get massive value with their armor-piercing arrows. So I think it's always worthwhile to bring some Marauder Horsemasters or Marauder Horsemen or throwing axes or something like that, just to zone them away. The Chaos Warriors held their ground. They basically just trashed the Gobos. That's really their main job, is to crash the cheap, chaff infantry orcs bring to the field, while these trolls kind of are supposed to deal with the armor. From my opponent's perspective, I do think his key mistake was the fact that he kind of brought his troops in a slow, one at a time sort of manner. Had he pivoted his whole army and kind of come in as a straight line, then with a more unified sort of front, he definitely could have gotten in, not lost a whole bunch of troops, not had about half his army routing before the Black Orcs got into the fight, and that would have definitely made things much tougher for me to deal with. This way, I could defeat him piecemeal, and eventually, essentially, just withdraw from them in my opponent's little remaining pocket of infantry and wipe out the scraps on the edges. Nonetheless, great game to Alicio Gelli here over. I do hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below to keep up with additional content. As usual, guys, I do appreciate you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye for now.